May I invite you in, friends, because my authority is almost on the line already. Perhaps, yeah, we close the door. Because we don't have stoppage time. Post-war future of Ukraine. What is the end game for Europe? I would personally say it in a different order. What is the end game for Ukraine? And what might be, as a consequence, the end game for Europe? Because every time I discuss and we speak about Ukraine, we should not forget that Ukraine and Ukrainians are fighting our war. They're fighting our war. And that leaves us with a great responsibility to support them. Of course, also think about the end game, if there is an end game. We'll hear from our distinguished speakers. And see to it that we listen to Ukraine about answering the question, what is the end game? What is acceptable? What is politically acceptable? What is militarily acceptable? What do Ukrainians think? What does President Zelensky think? What do the Ukrainian people think? And then, of course, in the transatlantic community, I deliberately not speak about the West, but in the transatlantic community, in NATO and the European Union, that same debate will also take place. And I'm afraid for one consequence, and our speakers might address it, that in this horrible war of aggression instigated by Vladimir Putin and by Russia, we have to accept, as we speak, that in my experience, and I think also in yours, neither in NATO nor in the European Union there has ever been a consensual Russia policy. And that is not without danger politically for us in the Transatlantic Alliance, but certainly first and foremost for Ukraine. My second and final remark is this. The French have a nice saying, noblesse oblige. And to the participants in the panel, my question, we have decided, the European Union has decided to grant Ukraine candidate membership of the European Union. And my plea is, let's be serious about that political decision. And let's not repeat, and it happened under my watch as NATO Secretary General, let's not repeat what happened in 2008. That we promised Ukraine something of which we knew we could not deliver. Having said that, I'll stop here. I'll introduce the speakers in person here and online when I give them the floor. I see that we have at least a fair gender balance in the participants in this panel. Ladies, a warm welcome to you online. I hope you can hear us loud and clear and you can see us as well. We have, as I said, 5 very distinguished speakers. We're very glad to have them. And the first one I'll be asked to take the floor is the founder of the Institute of Post-Information Society and also former Deputy Minister of Information Policy of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro Zolotukin. And it's with great pleasure, sir, that I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor, I repeat, to have you as a moderator. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I identify myself as a European. I'm not a citizen of the EU member country. I'm a citizen of Ukraine. But I define myself as a European because when I come to Brussels or any other European cities, I feel myself like at home. And I think that Kyiv is the same for many Europeans who come into Kyiv. They feel themselves like being at home. This is why it's very important, I think, that you have mentioned that the first issue that we have to talk about is the future for Europe, And when we will decide what future for Europe and for Europeans, and for me, including for me and my children, what future is favorable for us, then we will, after this, we will decide what end game will be for Ukraine. I think that the values, how they call the European values that are leading this community of Europeans, are saying very direct and simple things, that the future of Europeans should be, in first time, should be covered in the issues of the human rights priority. And in this simple way, first issue for the endgame of Ukraine should be the restoration of the human rights of Ukrainians. That means that they have right for the territorial integrity, they have right for their life, they have right to raise their children the way they want to, they have the right to join any or not to join any union or any international organization. They have the right to restore all those rights that were violated by the aggressor state. Before this will be done, we cannot declare that the war is over and then game came. Second, I think that the second issue is the national security. And national security is, according to the theory, is the state of the being defended from the threats. That means that when President Vladimir Zelensky saying that our goal is to the restoration of the Ukrainian borders, internationally recognized in 1991, I have one simple impulsive question. Then let's pretend we already restored the internationally recognized Ukrainian borders. What do we do with the kamikaze drones and missile attacks that do not recognize the borders and do not recognize any kind of air, space, or whatever? So that means that Ukraine will turn to kind of Israel with all this, the iron shield on the ear. But Ukraine is several times bigger than Israel, and several times, I think that dozens of times more money it will require to build this shield. And still the threat will be there. Still the threat will be there, because before we get our national security and security for European Union also, the war will not end, and there will not be end game. So in the end of the day, before Russian Empire, unfortunately this is an empire because the Russian constitution says that this is federation, but Russia is being run like an imperial country by an emperor, with the significant issues that describe it as a empire. First is the identity that is being weaponized and used to suppress other identities. By the way, did you ever know that the word Russian in English can be translated in Russian in two ways? Русский, which is identity of the person who has its roots in Kiev and Rus, and Россиянин, which says that Россиянин is the part of the Russian Federation, the part of the Россия. So Россиянин, and as a Russian, it means that this is a polytonym. This is a person who has his identity with a political, I would say, manufactured, not natural identity. But except of them, we have about like 100 identities: Чуваши, Буряты, Татары, Калмыки, Chechenцы, Dagestanцы, Ingrimlanцы, and others and others and others. In all of them, they are being suppressed. They cannot say that I am Chuvash, I am Kalmyk. They have to say I'm Russian. When you are pressed and when you're forced to say that your identity is not real, but your identity is Russian, then if you doing this, so you will obey the order. Go there and kill this person, go there and rape this person, and so on and so forth. So the end game can be upon two simple terms, two simple precautions. First is military victory of Ukraine over Russian Federation. And we have to accept this as a future for Europe. And we have to ask European leaders to say not We don't want Russia to lose because we don't want Russia to win the war, because Olaf Scholz and Jens Stoltenberg, they're saying we don't want Russia to win. It's not winning. The war is continuing. We have to ask European leaders to say we want Ukraine to win the war, we want Russia to be defeated. First is military victory Ukraine over the Russia. Second is guarantee of this war will never repeat it. The never again, as the absolutely simple and direct slogan of the Second World War, never again. By words never again, Russia has to be ceased to exist as an empire. It has to start to exist as a republic, as a democratic state, with the different identities and with the respect of different people who lived there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmytro, for your intervention. We'll go quickly to Estonia and to the Under-Secretary for Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tallinn, Madam Kilikesi Laste-Elling. She joins us online. Madam Under-Secretary, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation also to participate in today's panel. And indeed, this is the most important topic for us in Tallinn. It's an existential issue. And I completely agree that Ukraine right now is fighting our war and for us. And this is something very strongly felt by all Estonians, indeed. Our fundamental goal is to make sure that Russia's aggression in Ukraine fails. And I think actually Ursula von der Leyen has put it quite well, that Ukraine needs to prevail and Russia needs to fail. And that's what we need to work towards. I think when it comes to the end game and what the conditions for that could be, then I think, President Zelensky has many times repeated what the terms from a Ukrainian point of view have to be, and we completely agree with them. Of course, it's up to them to set the criteria. So Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty needs to be restored. Russia must be held accountable for the crimes, the war crimes and the crime of aggression. And also Russia, from our point of view, must pay reparations. They must pay for what they have done and for all the destruction and the damage. As to the end game for Europe, maybe just a point in saying that from our point of view, we think that whatever happens, the existing European security architecture needs to be strengthened. NATO and the European Union need to be strengthened. And at the end of the day, this is a point I think that the previous speaker also made. We need to make sure that any repetition of this aggression, we need to make it impossible. So how do we get there? And this is something that we've been pushing very much for in the past sort of 9 months, even before. We need to give Ukraine as much support as we can. We have done a lot. We, and I'm speaking here on behalf of sort of everybody, Collective West, the US, European Union, NATO. We have done a lot, but there's still more we can do, and we have to do. We have to continue supporting Ukraine, of course, militarily, providing military assistance, but also politically. And I completely agree with the point on the EU candidate country status that was awarded to Ukraine in June. I think this was a really important step. It gave hope, I hope, at least to the Ukrainian people, but we need to now fill that with sort of practical measures and steps. If Ukraine is going to accede to the European Union, they need to be put on a real path to get there. And I agree also with the point on NATO and the Bucharest summit decisions from 2008, that the decision was made that Ukraine will one day become a member of NATO, but there was no, process or roadmap provided for Ukraine on how to get there. And maybe that's, I think, one of the most important lessons that we have to learn from this current war and the aggression is that by leaving things sort of open-ended, a situation was created in which sort of Russia just felt that they can repeat what they've been doing and take these kinds of very radical steps and even attempt a whole-scale invasion of a country in Europe. It was not just changing borders in Europe like in 2014 with the illegal occupation of Crimea, but a whole-scale invasion is what they undertook. And I unfortunately feel that those goals are goals that Putin and or the Russian regime to this day still holds. So that's why it's so important that again, Russia, as has been repeated before, fails in this aggression attempt.
Thank you very much, Madam Under-Secretary, for making these points. Let us remind each other that when I joined NATO in 2004, it took a year before the Allies agreed to air policing over Baltic airspace because that was not considered necessary. But again, that's a sideline. We go to our third speaker. Ms. Veronika Tsvepkalo, Belarus opposition leader, together with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Maria Kalesnikova. Our great respect, Madam, I can say on behalf of all of us here assembled in Brussels, for what you're doing, your three and others, your colleagues, against the horrible regime of Mr. Lukashenko in Belarus. It's a great pleasure to have you online with us, and please take the floor.
Good evening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak in front of you. If we look at the war and this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, my thoughts are the following. When we look at the Russian history, every time Russia loses the war, it prompted a serious internal changes inside of the country. For example, if we recall the war, Crimea War between Russia in 1853, that you remember that Russia lost this war, and it prompted, the uprising by peasants. The next war which Russia lost was in 1904-1905. It's the war between Russia and Japan, Tsushima, and this is when Russians lost the war as well. And this is when the revolution in Russia started for 2 years, and only Stolypin agrarian reforms helped to stop this war. In 1917, in Russian history, there was World War I when they lost the war as well, and there was a long revolution. So my point is the legitimacy of President Putin is going to go down when the Ukrainians are going to win this war, because nobody have any doubts this war will be won by Ukrainians, because they fight for their land, they fight for their future, they fight for their country, and Russian soldiers, unfortunately, as of today, do not understand and acknowledge what is the reason for them to be on the territory of Ukraine. I believe the main challenge for Putin will be in 2023, because if you listen to even Russian experts, they say Putin will not survive as a politician in 2023. The main challenge will come from not the establishment, but probably from the management, the leaders who are not seen on the political scene right now. This is what happened in Belarus in 2020, because Lukashenko, he didn't expect that our top managers would challenge him. And this has happened in Belarus. When my husband, he was a presidential campaign, and he managed to build the largest high technology park, the largest IT cluster in the Republic of Belarus. And then we had Viktor Babarika, who used to be the general manager, the chairman of Belgazprom Bank. This is Russian bank, which is based in Belarus, and also from Sergei Tikhanovsky, the husband of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who took part in these presidential elections. In any way, I think when the window of opportunity will open in Russia, Putin will have many problems, many challenges from his team, from his people, who, as I said, would not be visible so far. Therefore, I have no doubts when the Putin loses this war, it will liberate Belarus as well. But I appeal to international community, knowing President Lukashenko, when Russians are going to lose the war, he is going to, blame President Putin. He's going to depict him as the savior of Belarus. So please do not listen to this person, because he, several months ago, before the invasion of Ukraine, he was swearing to Belarus people, and he was swearing to Ukrainian people that not a single boot, not a single missile will be launched from the territory of Belarus. And now it's not true. So that's why I ask you all, when the war is over, hopefully it will be over very soon, do not listen to President Lukashenko, because he was going to deceive you once again. This is what he has been doing with our people for the last 28 years.
Thank you so very much, Madam, for participating and for your intervention. It's now time for you in the audience, and then we listen to the other two speakers. So questions, please, and state your affiliation, and to whom of the ones who have spoken you want to address, you would like to address the question. Gentleman in the back there.
Thank you for the floor. National News Agency of Ukraine. I'm a journalist working constantly in Brussels. My name is Dmitro Shkurko. My first question is to Mr. Zolotukhin, if I may. Living here in Brussels, I noticed one very interesting phenomena. We can, of course, hope to solidarity and the assistance from the West in our struggle. But at the end, hoping to the assistance, we need to be counting on our own might, on our own abilities. And I just want to understand if Ukrainian public understand that. And another question and comment to Mr. Schaffer, if
in one sentence, because yeah.
One sentence. Don't you think that in 2008 it was not undelivered hope, but lost opportunity? Because if Ukraine got invitation to NATO in 2008, there would be no war, not only in Ukraine, but in Georgia also. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would not underestimate the level and the amount of the support that has been delivered to Ukraine from the EU member countries. On the other hand, yes, among the Ukrainian public, there is a narrative sometimes that it's not enough. It's absolutely visible, as absolutely natural, and I'm asking you not to deeply drill down in this, because these people are suffering because of the shellings, because of the missile attacks, because of the shortage of energy, and of course they feel that this is not enough. On the other hand, I think that European leaders, the political leaders, they still not fully believe in the issue that it's not gonna end somehow by the deal between two sides, by some negotiations. Let's talk. Let's bring China into dialogue. Let's bring Turkey into dialogue. Let's bring someone. Let's bring third party, and it's gonna somehow give us a relief. There will not be a relief, because those people, those Ukrainians who still living on the occupied territories, they are under tortures, they are under rapings and killings and so on. And unfortunately, we cannot sit on the table and negotiate with the aggressor country before they are liberated. This is why I think that the closest way to end this is to understand the military victory of Ukraine on the battlefield, supported by the European Union and European efforts. So this is the only end game possible for this.
Thank you. Who's next? Please, sir, in the front here. Let me in one sentence answer your question. We made a promise on which we could not deliver, on which there was no consensus in 2008, and I add there's no consensus now. Don't make a promise if you can't deliver. That is my simple answer. Don't do it, and that's why we have to deliver on the European Union. Please, sir.
Thank you, Philippe Lefebvre from Keeping Channels Open. I have a question for the wider panel, and indeed maybe yourself, Mr. Moderator.
Well, limited
but
to the
of
panel.
course to the panel. Yes. Do international organizations such as the OSCE, or maybe even if the European political community becomes an organization, have a place in a post-war future of Europe, or has their own structure, their intergovernmental structure, shown their own weaknesses and they should be reformed?
Madam Under Secretary, could I pass this question to you, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting question. On the OSCE, it remains to be seen, I have to say. As a consensus organization, I think we're quite seeing right now a lot of difficulty, of course, within the OSCE on any and every issue, actually, because you need the consensus and it's not there. Nevertheless, I'm not advocating for any kind of end to the OSCE. I mean, I think ultimately we need this type of an organization in Europe, but I could foresee, maybe just thinking about the future, that it will have to be somehow restructured or reshaped. When and where and how, I don't know. But the fact is that I think we need this kind of a fora where we can discuss wider, and I think the OSCE's benefit is also that it includes our partners from North America as well, and a wider group of European countries. The European political community, I think, is quite quite interesting, and I can actually say that at first, when the idea was launched or put on the table, we were slightly skeptical as to, what will this new sort of a meeting, or I don't want to call it a forum yet, but a meeting actually achieve and do. But I can say that after the first meeting in Prague that the Czech presidency sort of helped organize, we're a little bit more optimistic about it. And sort of, I know that our prime minister, who, for example, participated, said that there was a really good discussion, actually. And I think the benefit there was that it included it wasn't just an EU, and especially EU institution-led meeting. It was wider. There were interesting discussions with other Europeans, other countries, for example, Turkey, and I think all of that was at least from what I heard was quite useful. So let's see where it goes. I think right now there's quite an ambitious plan to have. I think biannual meetings that might be a bit burdensome or a lot, but let's see if the leaders are ready to meet and to congregate. And next time, I believe it's in Moldova. The next meeting will be next year. Then why not?
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Question, gender balance, there in the back.
Can I jump in just with one sentence?
Very briefly, because I want to go to the other two speakers.
I don't believe that Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe can provide us with some security and cooperation before Russian Federation will not be withdrawn from it. Thank you.
Hello, yes, my name's Sandra from Keeping Channels Open. I'm just wondering about the role of the Russian diaspora and opposition. Now that Alexei Navalny is in jail, who is leading and developing this alternative leadership? Because it really feels like you need that to be visible so that people know there are other choices for Russia than what we have now. I don't see it.
To whom would you like to put this question?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
Everyone.
Then perhaps let's go to you again, Dimitri.
The point is that to provide the leadership, one have to present the picture of future. Unfortunately, the picture of future that is now being presented by the representatives of the public Russian opposition says one simple message. First step, Ukraine wins the war. Second step, Russia becomes a democratic country. As from my perspective, unfortunately, I don't understand the correlation between these two facts. Secondly, I don't understand how Russia becomes democratic after Ukraine wins the war, how it's technically proceeds, who is doing this. And thirdly, if we consider that Ukraine is winning the war and after this Russia got some changes, so Ukraine has to participate in discussion what are the changes should be in Russian Federation. Before Ukraine would not be onboarded on this discussion with any kind of Russian representatives, we will not have the Russian leadership in terms of Russian opposition leadership. Thank you.
Veronika Tsepkalo, perhaps very briefly, same question and then answer for Belarus, please.
Well, I agree with the previous speaker, but I would like to add on top, in the countries, in the dictatorial countries like Belarus, like Russian Federation, there is no chance for opposition to speak, to openly speak up with the public. Because, for example, if we talk about Belarus, if you're in opposition, you end up either in the prison or in exile. Lukashenko doesn't allow to any person to be inside of the country if you are oppose him or his regime. Therefore, the same applies to Russia. As I said, there are hidden leaders right now, but they cannot show up, because once you show up, like Sergei Tikhanovsky did in Belarus in 2020, he was immediately preventively put in the prison before the election kicked off. Therefore, it's try to survive in the countries, dictatorial, authoritarian countries, unless you have a democratic country where you're not, where you're not put for your thoughts in the prison for your thoughts or for what you say.
Thank you so much. We go to the second round of interventions from our distinguished speakers. And I go first to Mrs. Mariam Kinshurashvili, Director of Programs at Generation I and researcher at Transition International, joining us online. Madam, please, over to you.
Greetings from Amman. I'm very happy to be joining Friends of Europe, and it's an honor for me to visit with the Friends of Ukraine, as I hope. And when we talk about the end game in Ukraine, it's worth to remember the recent speech by President Zelensky, who has laid out a clear roadmap on how to end this war and prevent it from resurfacing, and to ensure that Russia remains denied the victory and prevent it from continuing this war. We need to ensure that any negotiations for peace are only on fair conditions as laid out by the president. As of now, we can see the significant success of Ukrainian armed forces on the battleground. And this is attributed mostly to the help from the West in military equipment, both and in training, and also in strategic, operational, and tactical management and professionalism and high morale of Ukrainian defenders. And Russia, in the meantime, is running out of precision-guided ammunition and experienced personnel. And preventing the war going beyond 2023 is only possible if the current weapons are supplied and the shipments are sustained at the same rate, and the West takes the decision to shift to delivery of the heavy weapon system that Ukraine asked for. Because Ukraine now serves as a shield, and the way to make the shield work in long term is to provide short and medium range missile systems, battle tanks, strategic and theater air defense systems, and fighter jets. But even like we see that the end game for Ukraine is the victory in this war. But I want to quote here General Zaluzhny, who said that knowing what we know about Russians, victory will not be final. And the victory will be an opportunity to take a breath and prepare for the next war. And sadly, in our region, we know it all too well. And we know for sure that Russia cannot and should not be trusted, because in the current reality, what we see now is that the civilized world faces the monster of the Russian Orthodox fundamentalists, which can be compared to ISIS-grade fundamentalists. And Ukraine has proven that it can be viewed as an integral part of Euro-Atlantic security infrastructure. This country is gradually turning into the largest donor of security in Europe by lifting the Russian threat on one hand, but what's also important, questioning the myth of invincibility of Putin's regime. And here we come to the question of the impact of Ukraine's victory over Russia. Because as we see, Putin went all in into this war. And in many of his speeches, he declared that he denies the very fact of the existence of Ukrainian nation. The op-ed, which many of us remember for RIA Novosti, what Russia should do with Ukraine, openly called for full destruction of Ukrainian state and Ukrainian identity. So the very fact that today the victim started showing fangs, that the NATO puppet, as they like to call, the Russian propagandists like to call Ukraine, especially in the foreign language media. So this pawn is turning into the queen. And this is the modern David versus Goliath epic legacy, which is reenacted now. After the retreat of Russians from Kherson, Alexander Dugin, their ultra-nationalist, prime ideologist of the Russian world, he openly called for Putin to be overthrown and hinting that the king of the reigns should be killed. And TV propagandists started using the word regime in conjunction with the word corruption, which has never, ever happened before. And this is a very important thing. So the victory of Ukraine and the returning of all temporary occupied territories, including Donbass and Crimea, will lead to the desacralization of the Russian world and demystification of Russia as an idea. And I'm sure the government of Ukraine, they understand that the military victory will not be the end of this war, because it has already shifted into the realm of ideology and existential dimension. So an important part here is that we get the narrative war. And we are happy to see that the EU is very successful in countering disinformation now on its territory, and Ukraine is doing an outstanding job on the informational front, especially in the West and in English-speaking countries. However, sitting here in Jordan, in the Middle East, I can see that Russia is winning globally this information war. And the solution here, I see that we need to be more proactive rather than reactive. And although debunking myths and encouraging like countries in Eastern Partnership work on debunking myths is really important, at the same time, the reach can be minimal and it can just be within the bubble. Russia has always used, I would say, the individual approach rather than institutional approach in their propaganda. And we need to shift our focus and enter the field where Russia is operating to win over the Middle East, North Africa, Asia, because from what I see now, we are not doing that. And the pro-democracy, pro-Western voices are less and less heard, and we need to encourage these voices.
Thank you so much from Amman in Jordan, if I've understood you correctly. Thank you for your contribution. That brings us to our final speaker before we go back to you in the audience, Mr. Alexander Danylyuk, Head of Center for Defense Reforms, former Chief Advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and former Special Advisor to the Head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Sir, with great pleasure, I give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for very interesting discussion today, a lot of interesting insights. So it's a privilege to be the last speaker today, so I will try not to repeat anybody who used to be before me. So you mentioned that this is our common war, and I think that you're absolutely right. And actually, maybe not so many Europeans and citizens of NATO countries realize that, but for sure there is only one difference between Ukrainians and citizens of these countries. So we are on the edge of that aggression, and you are in the rear, and you are actually should be very thankful because of that, because despite of all of the little discomfort you can feel here, it's very different to what actually Ukrainian civilians and military personnel face every day. In this regard, if it's our common war, we have to have common goals, right, in this war. And obviously, to win this war, it means not only to force Russia to leave territory of Ukraine, but also to build stability and long-term peace in Europe, right? So it means that after the war, after the end of this war, Russia should start respecting not only borders of Ukraine, but international order in general. So there are three domains from my point of view in which it's possible to achieve this goal. So one of them, it's military domain, and in this domain, obviously, the key task from my point of view is not using all of the military means to liberate the territory of Ukraine, because as Dmytro said before, Russia will still have a chance to continue aggression by missile strikes and other long-range capabilities means against territory of Ukraine. So military domain, from my point of view, it's a domain in which Ukrainian troops should achieve complete military defeat of Russian troops by collapse of them. So actually military goal, it's achieving unacceptable damage to Russian military machine in general, and especially because it's not only professional army anymore, but total war. It means that it should be military defeat not only of Russian professional military, but also Russian ability to mobilize the society. The second domain is economic domain, and honestly, we should say that sanctions against Russia they don't work as good as we expected, and by that attacks on civilian infrastructure, Russia significantly undermined Ukrainian economy. So it's two tasks in this domain. One of them is to support Ukraine, because Ukraine is on the edge of the aggression, and another one is to make sanctions against Russia more smart, because some of them seem to be rather decorations and real, sanctions focused on making real damage. Because undermining Russian financial ability to support this war is also very important. And the third domain is human domain, because what we need at the end of the war, we need Russia to recognize its defeat and to recognize that Russia made a mistake by aggression. And it means that not only Russian population, but also Russian elites should recognize that fact. And it means that investments into inspiring anti-war protests in Russia and transformation of that anti-war protests into anti-government protests, they are key task, as well as actually military defeat of Russian army in Ukraine. At the same time, Russia is not waiting, and there are a lot of active measures conducted by Russian intelligence services in Western countries, focused on undermining the will of Europeans to support Ukraine and to also destabilize governments of these countries. So actually, it should be additional investments into developing resilience of European and actually NATO countries in general against that interferences. So what sort of Russia would we love to have after the victory? I absolutely agree that it should be democratic, at least neutral to NATO country, with respect to the international order. It's important not only because of long-term stability in Europe, but because of the obvious attempt of China to start a new confrontation with the West, in which it's completely obvious they're looking for polarization of the world, and it would be very important to have Russia at least neutral in that new confrontation. Ukraine itself obviously is not only the current contributor to European security, but because of even geographical position, the shield of Europe. So it means that Ukrainian membership in NATO is more important after the victory for NATO than for Ukraine, because obviously Ukraine has the will, Ukraine has military capabilities, and with some very, very honestly moderate support from NATO, Ukraine could be that shield to protect the rest of Europe from that sort of surprise attacks. In economic sense, we had that discussion what to do with that potential problems with supplies from China. Ukraine is also the solution. With highly motivated, professional, educated, and cheap labor, Ukraine could become a new China for Europe. Actually, the relocation of industrial capabilities from China to Europe, which actually one of the reasonable solutions, could also take into account Ukraine as a potential place for that relocation.
You know China without Xi Jinping, I hope.
I think that it's another question, yeah, and again, so honestly, what is the difference between China, Russia, Iran, and Europe? Unfortunately, despite of all of the years of dominance, the Western civilization started being very isolationist. I mean that you actually stopped being global, and it's even in the US. And we remember what happened to other civilizations in the past who started being very much focused on its own isolation. Especially right now with Russian, Chinese expansionism, it's not the best time. So the world is global. There is no way you can sit home, and believe that it's possible just to peacefully coexist. Right now, Chinese strategy, which was articulated by Chairman Xi just a couple of weeks ago, it's bipolar world. And it means that China, with all of the industrial capabilities it built because of you mostly, will ignore all of the intellectual property, intellectual rights, will use all of its re-engineering for actually replicating all of the Western goods and services and selling them to countries of Africa, Latin America, and Asia, ignoring actually any international legal restrictions.
Thank you very much. I go back to the audience once again. Yes, Robert Pechel, my friend, colleague.
Thank you. Robert Scheller, former Polish diplomat, former NATO official. That's my former boss. Not really.
He's still alive.
I get an yes. Thank you. It's very kind of you. I get impression listening, even though the title is Post-War Future of Ukraine and Endgame for Europe, but in listening to all the panelists, de facto, the bulk of the time was spent discussing Russia policy, and it was said by moderator beginning that perhaps we suffered from the lack of the Russia policy or fully consensual. But it seems we have it now. And isn't the problem, so otherwise would the panelists agree, that the problem now is not so much with the lack of the policy, support to Ukraine, financial, military, sanctions, etc., and responsibility, but with the implementation in terms of its quality and the discipline in which the countries who actually are responsible for implementation of this policy execute it. So that's my question to the panel. Thank you.
Madam Under Secretary, tailor-made for you, I think, this question, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I agree. We have a Russia policy. We, again, sort of within the European Union, within NATO, there is an agreed sort of policy, which obviously the war now has somewhat changed. But anyway, some of the aspects were mentioned. I mean, I think isolating Russia is a very important policy line. Internationally, that I know the EU has been certainly working on quite a lot. Also raising the cost of war or aggression. And this means, above all, the sanctions work, which you can argue whether or not the sanctions are working or not. But I think sanctions are the type of thing that you need to let work a little bit. They take time to kick in. I mean, I agree there are some things that are probably having more of an impact on the Russian economy than others. But nevertheless, one of the positions that Estonia has been on is that we need to continue with the sanctions, with the packages, and indeed we need to respond that every time we see Russia's trying to escalate the conflict even more, we need to certainly be responsive and react to that. Accountability is a very important issue. And a policy line. The last European Council, actually, I think the EU leaders also referred to the need to have full accountability when it comes to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. That's still being worked out. I mean, I think a lot of these things, or these sort of policy lines, are still, in progress, if I can say. I think the first months of the war in the spring, maybe there was a bit more hope that this will pass quickly and maybe we can return to some kind of a previous, or I don't even want to use the word normal relationship, but nevertheless, but now I think there's a lot of realization, especially both on the EU and NATO side, that this could go on for a long time, and that we need to relook at our toolbox in a way, look at what are the instruments that we have that we can to actually meet the policy and fulfill the policy that we've adopted. So how do we help Ukraine in a sort of from the medium to the long term? We're so far, I think we've been using existing funds, but maybe we need to start thinking about a whole separate budget line. I mean, I know this is all very difficult to achieve within the EU and or NATO, but nevertheless, and so I think that a lot of the things are still sort of work in progress, but certainly accountability is a very important thing that I think even Ukraine itself has also been starting only now to really look at, I mean, they're floating this idea of a special tribunal, etc.
Thank you so much. Question, the gentleman with the beard in the back, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marius Cevelli, President of Sustainable Cooperation for Peace and Security, an Italian-based organization. And I have two short questions. How much space is left to dialogue with Russia? And how important and how reliable is Turkey in the dialogue process?
Thank you so much. Please.
Again, so I think that it was completely clear from my statement that there is no space for dialogue with Putin's regime. And actually, it was the mistake made by the West, at least since 2008, since the invasion of Russians in Georgia, to believe that there is any space for that dialogue. So this regime is a grave threat for the humankind. It should be considered as a such grave threat, and it should be replaced by something more reasonable. So this is one of the top goals of this war, because, again, we made another mistake as a country in 2014. Despite we had military capabilities to force Russians at least to leave Donbass, we made a mistake to listen to what our Western partners were telling us in 2014, and we actually started that negotiations in Minsk. So we have to understand that without that, we wouldn't have this huge war of conquest in Ukraine right now. The second, about Turkey. I think that actually Turkey as a negotiator or as a middleman in this process could be used to achieve some tactical goals, but again, important for both sides, like this grain deal, for instance. There is no way we can achieve anything with Turkey or with the US or with anybody else, because the problem is not in Kiev, the problem is not in Istanbul, in Brussels, or in Washington, D.C. The problem is in Moscow. This is the problem. And in this regard, we, again, have to be also so we have to understand that actually Moscow is ready to destabilize Turkey itself, to destabilize NATO using Turkish-Greek, potential conflict. And Russia is not ready. Russia is engaged in that sort of things. So we have to understand that all of these countries of NATO and the EU are targets of ongoing Russian subversive activities as well.
Dmitry, very briefly, and then one final question from the audience,
I just wanted
going back to the panel.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it in a bit another way. Third party cannot create the space of the dialogue. The space of the dialogue can be created by the two parties that has to negotiate. Unfortunately, Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, says on G19 gathering that energy should not be the weapon, and that was the message to the European Union. In the same day, Russian Federation firing on the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, demolishing it to make people in Ukraine being cold and without water supply and stuff. The space of the dialogue cannot be created by the third party. Russia doesn't want to create this space for the dialogue. It was several times confirmed. Thank you.
There's a Dutch saying which is applicable to Foreign Minister Ivanov. He has not suffocated in his first lie. It's a Dutch expression, and I think it's relevant. Final question, please. There in the back.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Hideaki Asada from Japan Machinery Center. When we talk, say, victory of Ukraine, does it include winning back Crimea, really? Because when we draw the line, when we have a, settle this war and end the war, because before the February 24th, the Crimea has been substantially occupied by Russia. So do we really want to push them back beyond the border between Crimea and Russia? Because the winning back Crimea might delay the ending war, and the ending war, delaying ending war means delaying the recovery of Ukraine. So what do we want for the victory of Ukraine?
I asked Mrs. Sepalo first, and then I'll go around the panel for your final words, and please keep them briefly. Madam first, on the question. Madam Sepalo, can you hear me? No.
Okay, if you don't mind, I will start answering this question.
Yeah, but madam, it might be on mute. You might be on mute, madam. Okay, we'll figure it out. I'll go here. I go first here to the room, and then I'll come back to you three for a final word, please.
So I think that again, so the total liberation of all of the territory of Ukraine, it's a matter of restoration of international order. First. Second, it's a matter of restoration of international nuclear security system as well, because I have to remind here that actually Ukraine abandoned the third nuclear arsenal in the world in 1993 to get guarantees from Russia and other nuclear powers that our territorial integrity should be respected and protected. So right now, if we would actually follow Russian nuclear blackmailing, which is actually the single possible option Russia has to continue pushing to Ukraine and to the West, we would undermine all of the system of international nuclear security, which is based on very simple principle that nuclear powers don't use nuclear weapon against non-nuclear power. Especially in the case of Ukraine, it would mean that any other country, including NATO members, should have their own nukes to protect themselves. It would create, all of the world into complete chaos, because not only, some privileged countries would have nukes, but every country. So that's why the restoration of Ukrainian territory is so important. And that's why it's much more important than Ukraine or Russia themselves.
Dmitry, please, over to you for your final word.
I think that this question is brilliantly describes the dialogue that we have in here. When we're talking that we consider that Ukraine, the victory of Ukraine is one chance for us, for our future, and then people say, okay, so you really want to win? So yes, guys, we really want to win this war, and by winning this war, we're saying that we have to preserve the human rights on all the occupied now territories of Ukraine, including Crimea. Before we retake Crimea, those human rights of those people staying there, they under the threat. And to remove the threat, we have to recapture Crimea back. So this is just the logic. It's not about the big geopolitical issues. It's about the basic values that we're talking about, human rights. Thank you.
Madam Kinshurashvili, may I call on you, please, for your final words?
Thank you. First of all, I would say Crimea is Ukraine, period. And when we talk further after the victory about the sustainable and physical and political reconstruction of Ukraine, it's only possible if Ukraine gets guarantees of sovereignty and territorial integrity from the EU and NATO states. Otherwise, all these efforts are doomed as unsustainable. And also, the important part here is fighting corruption. And without ability to defend itself militarily against the enemy threats, all efforts to modernize industry, green economy, energy supplies will be under constant threat of destruction. Because ideologically, Russia doesn't want neighboring countries to thrive. They don't want us, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Kazakhstan, to come out of the swamp of corruption and start living up to the ideals we're striving for. And this, like my country, unfortunately, Georgia is a perfect example how unprecedented pace of the reforms and growth can be just overthrown and backward when oligarchy and pro-Russian powers come to power. And Ukraine had to learn this lesson the hardest way. And hopefully after this, there is no way for the Ukrainian people back to the old corrupt mentality. And it's not an easy path. And we have to understand that here, Ukraine will need the most of the support of EU and the Western partners. But Ukrainian people, they have proven to the whole world that they can show outstanding capacity to unify in front of facing an existential threat. And now they have to prove that they can unify to build the new future, the post-war, post-victory future based on democratic principles and the rule of law and transparency.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for participating. Final words, Madam Celeste Elling, Madam Under Secretary from Estonia, Tallinn.
Yes, thank you very much. Very simply put, Ukraine needs to set the terms for any kind of a peace negotiation and final resolution to the conflict. And we should certainly not be putting pressure on them to agree to any kind of sort of untimely and early peace negotiations. We need to learn the lessons from 2014, perhaps from 2008 as well. Russia used force to change borders in Europe, violating Helsinki Final Act principles, international law. We need to keep to the international law. We need to stay united. And above all, we can't be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid. I mean, yes, we have to take Russian saber rattling, etc., seriously. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be frightened into agreeing to something that is not going to stick in the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Finally, Veronika Tsepkalo, can you hear me and us? Can you see us? No, unfortunately, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're still, I'm afraid, on mute. Can you hear us? You can hear us, but we can't hear you, unfortunately. Let me then address my final words to you and the other panelists. We have all highly appreciated your participation. I think it was a good discussion. The end game is a very difficult word, as I've said in my introduction. And let me make. I'm not going to summarize because we have an important ceremony coming up under Paul Taylor's able leadership. One, let's be serious on the process on Ukraine and the European Union. Two, let's do more and let's invest more in support we need in the global south. And three, and finally, I end with Tip O'Neill. If our policies are successful, that our policies should be successful depends on a large extent of the resilience of our democracies. It is easy to show solidarity in the middle of summer. It becomes a bit more complicated when you have a hard winter, this winter or coming winter. But I want to spread the message that it is also about, under the heading All Politics is Local, about our democracies. It is about our democracies. We talk about democracies, we talk about the rule of law, we talk about values. Let's keep them up and let's defend them and let our political leaders defend them and not give in to all kinds of other priorities. Thank you all very much. A big round of applause. And you have to stay on your seats because I now, with great pleasure, hand over to Senior Fellow, His Excellency Paul Taylor.
Oh, that's the first time I've ever been described as an excellency. His Excellent Sufficiency, Paul Taylor. I think it was my modesty you were referring to, yeah. Glad you've all stayed. It's been a long day, but we've had an essay contest as part of this security for the first time, and we had contributions, submissions from both sides of the Atlantic, and so I don't have some actress here to hand me an envelope to open, but the winner is Anna Maria Rufanda. She is from Romania, but originally, I think, from Moldova. And she was judged to have written the best essay. She studies in the Netherlands. She wrote the essay in English, which probably isn't her first language. A very interesting essay about how the Euro-Atlantic community can revive global multilateral cooperation. And one of the things she said was something that was said by one of our panelists, you know, that if NATO had let Ukraine in 2008, we wouldn't be here. I don't know where we would be and what the consequence would have been, but as Jaap said, that wasn't possible at the time and probably isn't yet possible now. But she had some very useful ideas as to how transatlantic cooperation can be revived and built on. And those have to, of course, survive a possible change of control of government in the United States, partial or complete in the coming years. So it's important to build on it now while the sun is shining, as a former American president would have said. And I want to just finish, Anna Maria, before I present you with this token of our esteem and congratulations, with your last words, because I think it's worth all of us taking home tonight. Start building bridges, not walls. Anna Maria Rufanda, please come up and accept your prize. We have to do this like one of those political photo ops, you know, where we stand here smiling, shaking hands, grinning. You show your award, and the photographers take the pictures, right? Well done, and good luck, and we look forward to having you with us this evening. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the conference. It's been a great day. Thank you for staying so long. Thanks to our guests from the College of Europe who contributed questions and rejuvenated our audience. There's a drink waiting for you outside. And thanks to Jaap for his moderation and to all the participants in that excellent last session. Chin.